Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. My name is Taylor Rockwell, and it's Tuesday, and what's that I sense in the air? It feels like it would normally be enthusiasm and excitement, but is instead sort of a looming dread and generalized concern, which means it's another U.S. men's national team game day. We're going to be taking another look at Saturday's loss to South Korea, which many would say was comprehensive, but a select few would say was undeserved somehow. Poch still making some comments. We're going to answer some listener questions and see which players have the most to prove tonight against Japan. To do so, I'm joined by a man who's excited to find out our next mystery box player. Fingers crossed for Lamine Yamal. It's Joe Lowry. Hi, Joe.
We can do that? I knew the possibility of a mystery box is now always on the table because we've had two of them in this window. If we could just please have your best player, Spain, maybe your best player, England. Like, can we just share a little bit? We're hosting a World Cup and we don't want to get embarrassed, guys. I think it's best for everybody if we go out and embark on this.
When you go to a dinner party, you bring a fine bottle of wine. I think it's only customary.
Exactly. Put Lamine Yamal in a port and let's get this show on the road.
Joe, I wrote this introduction last night, and then this morning I saw that he missed Spain's flight back from Turkey because he lost his passport. Perfect. He had to fly back private. So, no longer has a Spanish passport. Maybe we just give him a U.S. one. We see what happens.
Hey, Lamine, here's your new passport. Don't look inside. Don't open it. We've got a cover on the outside. It's your new passport. It's all you need, I promise.
Rounding out our crew, you heard him speak a moment ago, a man who knows that the most important parts of any friendly are the closing minutes after everyone has made all their changes and the game is going at 75% speed. It's Jeff Reuter. Hello, Jeff.
Yeah, that's the game state that we honestly create. Everything we do beforehand is to get those moments, right? Yes, and that's when you look and say, this is going to be the most informative of a World Cup knockout game, is once you get to those points. It's just like, you can't simulate that in training, you know? You need to build into an organic game to have that 75 through 90 minute.
Yeah, of course. You got to get the quadruple change all at once to really simulate a true World Cup aesthetic.
Totally.
We will take a look ahead at that Japan friendly still to come at time of recording. But first, Jeff, we haven't yet heard your thoughts about the USA's loss on Saturday night. I'm assuming you're much more positive than everyone else. No? Okay. Resolved.
Right. No, it's more of the same. We're playing the hits here. I mean, there's just like... So Wednesday of this week, the 10th, is going to be the one-year memorial of Pochettino being appointed here. And there was a really good piece on Backheeled by a scribe named Joseph Lowry. I was texting about this with Joe last night, actually, is how like every outlet that he's written for calls him Joseph, and yet he calls himself Joe. Well. Oh, so like here we go. We're still trying to identify this man. But.
Joseph is my serious writer alter ego, and Joe is the Let It Loose, famously Let It Loose on the podcast alter ego that I am always on this show. Let it fly.
Joe Joe letting it loose feels like the top button unbuttoned and the tie slightly loosened.
Very
That's
much.
Joe getting wild.
Well, let's not go overboard, Taylor. Come on.
At what phase of your career do you unfurl a J middle name Lowry?
Oh. Once I read a book, that feels like sort of like the highbrow book writer thing to do. Also known as an author thing to do, but I prefer the term book writer because I'm not one.
Author, I hardly know her.
We are doing a lot of work to not talk about the USA's loss to Korea.
No, Jeff was about to say nice things about me. Jeff, keep going with what you were saying before.
Well, you had written a fantastic piece about how this team, like his whole mission was we're going to be proactive in possession, we're going to be the instigators, the aggressors, and when we lose the ball, we are going to fight like the Dickens to get the ball back because that is the modern game. And we've seen like none of that. And I think that, we're all cracking jokes up at the front of it because it is just a bummer. Like it's so hard to find those moments of optimism. There isn't that clever, like I can see the work being done. It just isn't manifesting in like games of soccer or results, but like trust the process. Like it's really hard even to find those when you're still vetting new players from the pool with now 9 games remaining before a World Cup. Just to me, it's like the last few windows, especially just this year in general, I would say Nations League notwithstanding maybe because those were competitive games. And the Gold Cup, you have the different squads, so that's its own qualifying factor. You don't have World Cup qualifying. And I just wonder how many of these decisions, or indecisions, maybe is a better way to frame some of them when it comes to player selection, are coming because there is no pressure from window to window. You do have this sort of like, especially for someone who has never worked in the international game, Mauricio Pochettino, and he is coming in with a club mentality and saying, we have time. Like, this is preseason on the calendar. It means as much as when Chelsea would play friendlies against Solihull Moors or whatever, right? But the difference here is that These are the same players. You don't have transfer windows. You don't have. There's just like all of these, and you have so much time in between these windows where it's such a clearly wasted opportunity. Where I think anyone who had worked in international management before, or had even considered it before this moment, would be better equipped to navigate the difficulties and the nuances here. And I think that like. There's the parallels that we can pull with Jesse Marsh in Canada, and we can do that until, again, we could do this for a 4-hour episode if you want to, but like it's just there's such a different way that you can go about this. But when you aren't the host nation, when you don't have a Confederations Cup to serve as a dress rehearsal, and you don't have World Cup qualifiers to serve as like actually testing your player pool, so that you say, for example, Max Arvson couldn't defend against CONCACAF right wingers. We need to put him somewhere else. Well, now you can say, okay, but I really liked what he did against Costa Rica going forward with the goal and the assist. So I'm going to be extremely patient in hopes he learns how to defend rather than trying to find a viable alternative to Anthony Robinson. So I just like some of this just shows how green he is. And it's all of these concerns that I had when they were trying to hire Jurgen Klopp. And it's these concerns I've had since then. But it's just hard because I think I've kind of lost track of what they're trying to build to anymore with all of the decisions he's made.
It's Jeff, it's an interesting point you make because Pochettino he talked about this in his press conference yesterday, this idea that they've already qualified for the World Cup, right? There is not this same pressure, almost exactly what you just said. I think Mauricio Pochettino would agree with that. And the bet that he's made is that the time he has now, which is relatively risk-free time, at least in the short term, the time he has now is best spent evaluating different players and going and digging through and trying to fix this culture effectively. He brought up yesterday, unprompted, the March window, the Nations League window in his press conference, where he made it clear that after that window, they realized they had to reset something. I think up until that point, he was fairly willing to continue with what was already built, right? Where if you think about the first roster from Mauricio Pochettino back in October, there were a lot of injuries in that squad. We didn't see Weston McKennie, if memory serves, in that window. No Balogun, there were changes, but not because Pochettino just wanted to torch the squad to the ground and to bring in his own guys and reset the culture. Then you get into November, and that's Nations League quarterfinals against Jamaica. Again, a fairly familiar squad in that window. And then you get January camp, normal stuff there by and large. And then you're into March. And that game against Panama is the USMNT, right? I think Weston McKennie may be out for that game. It's a Testament Adams double pivot, if memory serves, in that match. Mm-hmm. But again, it is the group of guys that we know and sort of, I think, all almost still imagine as being the first choice guys. And Pochettino did not like how his team performed in that window. Did not like, it seems like, reading the tea leaves, how his team acted off the field in that window, and decided to spend the next 6 months effectively going and reevaluating just about everything and making very clear to his players that they are not safe, right? That nobody is safe. Even Christian Pulisic is not safe because I'm going to tell him he's not coming in for this summer if he doesn't want to come all the way in for this summer. And the bet that Poch is making is that that's going to be time well spent. And that is the thing that is just so hard to believe from where we sit right now. And this is what we were talking about, Jeff, in my mind at least, as far as the process is concerned. Like, I can see some of the thinking behind the process. The March game against Panama was terrible. Like, that was a horrible game. I can understand not wanting to stick with the status quo after that game. But the bet that you're making is that you're finding something that's going to be worthwhile, or you're making something that's going to prove to be worthwhile culture-wise later on. And at the moment, it's a bit hard to trust that process, even with Pochettino preaching it.
Joe, you set out a timeline there of basically what Poch was trying to do. Then you have the March games, and then there is this kind of shakeup.
Yep.
Say what you want about that shakeup and what the intention is going to be, how well it's going to go. I do want to talk about that. I do still see a lot of people saying, he's only here for the paycheck. He's only here because it's an easy gig, and then he can kind of go on about his career. And I get where that frustration is coming from. I do think some of what you're talking about, in my mind, disproves a little bit of that. Because if you are just here for the paycheck, you just keep playing those starters.
Totally.
It was a one-off result. Whatever, we'll get it together. And you just kind of stick with what's been there. You don't really challenge the status quo. You don't try to shake things up. And then if you get knocked out in the, first round in the World Cup, that was kind of what was expected. On we go. I do feel like he is trying to make some difficult changes and trying to try some difficult things with the luxury of not having World Cup qualifying. Do you buy that narrative as well, or are you inclined to say maybe he is still just here for the paycheck?
No, I agree with you, Taylor. I think there is nuance required here. My frustration with Pochettino or my he's here for the paycheck sort of belief would be that when he does come in to try and reshape the pool in his image, right, he does it in a way that seems so odd to me. right, with players that seem too far below the level where you're sacrificing too much to rebuild that culture, to the point where I'm wondering how much of some of these players he's seen. And we talked through the Roldan thing, Taylor, on Saturday, right, where Roldan arrives late, and it seems like Poch just kind of had watched him against Miami in the Leagues Cup final and realized, hey, we should grab that guy. I'm not sure what the legwork is looking like to land on what players are coming into camp, but ultimately, Graham talks about this all the time. If you're an elite level manager, like in Pochettino, he's not doing elite level work now, it doesn't seem like, but he has coached some of the biggest clubs in the world. The way you get there is by being hardwired to win, to not sleep, to do absurd things to get to that level of your career. And we've seen Pochettino as a player, we've seen him as a manager. He is hardwired to win. I do honestly believe that Mauricio Pochettino wants to win and has some sort of thing that he's building towards. It's turning out, though, that taking the lumps is difficult, and it's also turning out that I'm not sure I've got a lot of belief in the thing that he's building towards based on the evidence that we're getting so far. But I don't think Pochettino's just here to cash his lovely $6 million check. I think money helps, money talks. You don't get Pochettino without that kind of money. But I do think, at the end of the day, this is a guy that wants to win, and is probably very upset with the fact that nobody is believing that his team can actually win. I think that's grating on him.
What did we make of some of the comments after the match? Pochettino has obviously gotten a lot of headline treatment with some of the things he said, including that we need to win at the World Cup. I think we all might agree with that one.
Yeah.
I was particularly interested in what Tyler Adams has had to say. And I feel like he's been, maybe he was the player made available, maybe he's just been trying to kind of be introspective. But he puts a lot of the mistakes in the Korea game on the players and their failure to execute. He said, we just missed our triggers on a lot of plays, and when you're too late to jump, you end up chasing shadows, and that's what it felt like at times in this game. So he's basically saying we weren't kind of alive to the threats, we weren't aware of our responsibilities, we kind of jumped at the wrong time, and that's why they were so open, that's why they were able to play through us so effectively. And on the one hand, I appreciate that candor. I appreciate the kind of holding your hand up and saying, we got this wrong. On the other, Joe, to your point, this feels like the type of thing that we shouldn't be seeing as regularly and as often and as comprehensively from the entire team. And it does make me feel like, though they are trying to build towards something, they are trying to be proactive in possession and fighting hard to win the ball back. It's almost as though they're fighting too hard and not maybe using the brain part to execute the actual game plan.
Yeah,
Yeah,
where do you fall? Yeah.
It's interesting with Tyler because it's like him and Tim Ream and Walker Zimmerman have kind of been the media, quote, core for the last few years now. And it'll depend who else is in, and they'll throw in other players. But I remember vividly after the U.S. lost to Panama in 2024 in the Copa America, like Tyler was kind of front and center of that mix zone, and like it's all the scale, right? But like the idea was pretty much they were the one that they put U.S. Soccer put him out before the rest to make sure that everyone got Tyler quotes. And remember, Tim Weah throws an arm at the back of a Panamanian opponent, red card, game falls apart from there, right? And Tyler was saying, these are just mistakes and they're learning moments and we've all got to learn from it. And then I looked back at what he was saying after the elimination game against the Netherlands, and he's saying, these are tough mistakes, but we have to learn from them. And then I was looking at something that he had said after, I think it was Leeds was relegated maybe, or his last game before his injury. And then there was something with a Bournemouth performance as well, where like he is very savvy. And he does say, like, if players can admit we weren't perfect on this day, it takes some pressure off the coach. It changes the conversation, all these sorts of things. But there's a certain point where you get really tired of hearing we should learn from this when it doesn't look like they're learning from this. Right. And that was like what really resonated with me with the Panama moment in 24 was just sort of, this was supposed to be a generation that was all learning together, and they didn't seem to be learning anything, and now they're being separated. And I'm not really sure what more we're learning about them, the players that we still feel, in spite of their flaws at the 2024 Copa America, are probably the majority of your best 26-man squad for the 26 World Cup. We haven't learned much of anything about any of them over the last year plus. And I would say that the ones that we have learned, maybe it's like Chris Richards can be the lead center back, but isn't starting regularly enough to know who his deputy would be in a back four, or our goalkeeping situation is pretty grim. And we can get into that in a bit. I have a big piece that just came out this morning on The Athletic about goalkeeping. But it's just not coming together in a way where you would feel optimistic going into 26. I think that's my biggest thing, is there's like this lost opportunity where if you're going to be bad like I have to check. It's 2025 in America, so please don't take this out of context. If you're going to be bad like 2017 Russia, where you're at least trying to build cohesion with your core. You have 18 players who are in every single camp. You are playing friendlies against opponents that you will probably lose to, but you will learn what you would have needed to do to win. You will have 20 games of evidence against opponents who would ostensibly qualify for World Cups most year that you can study, survey, and assess, and at the same time, you're playing so many games in front of like rabid home support that once you get to the World Cup and you're doing better than you were a year ago, everyone's just really happy to see you're competitive. And a lot of that work, you can't, again, you can't just guarantee you can recreate that sort of run-in, but it just doesn't look like we're getting any of those things that have made host nations successful in the past with the U.S. men's national team.
But Poch would say it's not coming together yet because he hasn't brought it together yet, right? That we're still figuring out the combinations and who fits where and how best. And so the idea, I'm guessing, is that the October camp is meant to be the one where it all comes together. I fear that October will be like, yeah, we wanted it to be October, but you know what? We need to look at January one more time, and then we'll see you all in March. And I'm a little worried about how often that can is going to be kicked down the road and how far, but I would say that would be his counterpoint to that argument, right?
It's funny about October, Taylor, because I remember distinctly having discussions over the summer. Us talking about on the show, like, September is going to be fascinating.
That's the one.
We're gonna figure out what Poch's roster looks like. And Pochettino has said, like, and now it's on him. He said this is our last window of experimentation. So the expectation fully for everyone, including Pochettino and the staff and the players, should be that October is the roster that Pochettino believes is his best group of players, bar injury, because we know that this U.S. player pool is made of glass. That was true in the last cycle. It's true in this cycle. We see that all the time. We're reminded of that all the time, week in and week out at club level and when they assemble or try to for national team camp. But it is funny that can certainly is being kicked. I know we need to take a break. To go back to the Adams thing very, very briefly, I love that Adams quote about chasing shadows. And that I'm not trying to say that Adams is absolved of guilt. He should not be. I think we talked about it on Saturday, Taylor. He had a bad game, straight up, and it's not been great for the USMNT recently. But the players should bear some responsibility for all of this. It's not just on Mauricio Pochettino. Like, that lineup that was picked for Saturday's game was a capable group of players. That is not like an embarrassment of a lineup to choose. It seems like Chris Richards is not 100% fit, or they didn't want to push him. So I don't think that's a talent ID flaw from Poch to start Blackman or Ream over Richards. So I don't think there's any guilt there for Pochettino. You look at the midfield double pivot, that's fine. The fullback choices made sense. Freeze made sense. The attacking personnel, I think, largely made sense with Balogun coming in after only really kind of just getting on the field for Monaco for 90 minutes. I think it all fits. But so many of the players just didn't show up. Like Seb Berhalter, we talked about a little bit over the weekend, but to do it again, because I rewatched this game yet again after we did that show, he just wasn't good. Like Sebastian Berhalter on the ball was a large minus for the U.S. He cannot move it forward in transition. He does not progress the ball. He doesn't have it in that phase of play, and that's okay. And I think he, honestly, if you got him to have a candid conversation, would probably admit that. But that was an issue. And Pulisic was mixed, as we talked about over the weekend. And you look at Josh Sargent. I thought Sargent was even worse on third viewing than he was on second, and worse on second than he was on first. There's a moment in the press where he's just pointing at someone to go and do the job that's supposed to be his, and that's in the backfield piece. Like, I screenshotted it, the clips in there.
Yeah, no, it's great.
It's appalling work from Sargent. Like, it's benchable behavior from Josh Sargent, and he gets benched in this game. So the players deserve some responsibility. Like, soccer is not American football, where you can regroup after every play. Responsibility to adjust, yes, needs to be on the manager and the coaching staff, and we saw some adjustments. The more aggressive press coming out of halftime still didn't really work, but it is what it is. But the players have to bear some responsibility for actually going out there and executing something and being able to see the game, interpret the game, and adjust. I just don't know that this group of players can do that, at least not the one that we saw on Saturday.
All right, so a sticky, hazy, murky situation that we have some clarity on, but not a lot of clarity. We're going to take a break on that note. We're going to come back and answer some Discord listener questions. Back very soon. Welcome back to the Total Soccer Show. We continue to talk about the U.S. men's national team. A fun topic, for sure. We've got 2 Discord questions to get through. Jeff, coming to you for this first one from Andrew. What do you think is the bigger issue right now? Player selection / availability or tactics?
2 things. One, I love that when we started doing episodes with the 3 of us, you used to poll like 5 or 6 listener questions for a segment. optimistically, and now you're like, these two, we have 2 topics. We have 2,
and we might only get to 1.
You're adapting, you're learning, and I'm really proud of you.
I mean, dude, it's all of us. I know that I sometimes can ask a very straightforward question and then add on about 3 paragraphs of filler information. So
yeah,
keep it tight.
I've made a career of doing that, my friend. I think that it's the players and the availability, because I think that informs the tactics. And I think especially once you get international, like, it's not going to be that sort of like rigid. In my mind, functionally, the best way to do it has to come from pragmatism more so than like, I'm building this team. What does my nation have to offer me in this shape? Because you're not always going to end up, and like, it's always like a song and dance between those 2 philosophies. You're never going to have the 26 best players on a World Cup roster, right? There are going to be trade-offs you have to make just given positional scarcity and depth in other places. But I think that when you look at the inability to have continuity in the midfield in particular, where you're still testing new options there or at center back, that becomes a problem. If you don't have the ability to field the same engine room and back line, it's just going to be hard to build those sort of tactical principles both in possession and out of it, because those are such crucial blocks that do have to move in response to each other. And those partnerships come best with like kind of, I mean, it's repetition, but it's also just eventually you build that sort of second nature synapse of like, I trust that this player is going to make that, so I don't have to, you know, kind of take 10% off of my next action to make sure I could do that if he doesn't, right? So I do think it comes down to the players, and I think part of that is, yes, availability. Part of that is also Pochettino's very obvious unfamiliarity with the American player pool, where he is having to examine players that I think a lot of people who are much more familiar with it would look and say, they would be like a January camp of 2027 option, where you're just kind of speculatively seeing what you've got there, rather than a September of 2025 option, right? And so I do think it comes down to the players more. And yes, some of this is also, a lot of these guys aren't 90-minute guys for their club anymore, and so they're not going to be as used to being asked to carry a team, because that is not what they do at their clubs right now, especially those in Europe. So yeah, I think it is more the players, because once you have that stability of players, I think that's when you can evolve the tactics more productively.
Yeah. Ultimately, Jeff, I would agree with that. I'm almost always going to go player selection and availability over tactics, like just on principle, because the players are the ones that decide the game at the end of the day. Not that the coach doesn't have impact there, but it is a smaller bit of impact than the players on the field. We're yet to see what I think the USMNT's best 11 is under Pochettino. That could happen next month. Maybe it won't. Either way, we saw a better version of the U.S. against South Korea than we have basically at any other point since March, probably, for the U.S. men's national team. So since the summer, I suppose. And I think there were moments on the ball, especially where you saw some of that quality. There were moments in the second half where you could see that, okay, this U.S. team, even with the game state caveat, looks like they can build into something in this game. It's a lot of doom and gloom right now for the U.S., and there's plenty of reasons for that. But it was not as if the U.S. were totally toothless in that game, or that there were absolutely zero positives against South Korea. There were huge flaws that look pretty addressable, because if I notice them as a third party, I feel like that means everybody in camp noticed them. This is a weird thing, because, to be honest, this made me feel a little more positive, this question from Andrew, about the U.S., because it is a reminder of just how many key pieces the U.S. are still missing. Now, the question mark is Pochettino going to call those players in at all, right? So maybe those key pieces, like Weston McKennie, are still going to be missing in October. We still don't know why Weston McKennie wasn't brought in. Poch gave his explanation. It didn't hold water. We don't know what's going on there. We don't understand it. The only explanation I have is that Poch is trying to communicate something to Weston McKennie about his spot not being locked in. But really, there is some positive here, because I just have such a hard time believing that Mauricio Pochettino watched Sebastian Berhalter play against South Korea and thought, yep, that's the best guy we can field in that spot. Like, to me, that is it impossible that he thought that? No, but to me, that seems so unlikely that Pochettino could have progressed this far in his career and have that sort of read on players. And maybe I'm wrong here. Maybe Seb Berhalter is the truth, right? But I can't shake this idea that we're going to come back in October and Pochettino really is going to have the roster largely, maybe bar a couple of fringe guys, right? Maybe he sticks with Arfson, which is fine. Like, a couple of these players in the roster, not starting, Max Arfson. But I can't shake the idea that we're going to see basically the squad that we all kind of want in October. That's not to say that I agree with how Pochettino's gone about all of this. I think a lot of time's been wasted. to kind of prove a point, I suppose, on the culture side that could have been addressed in other ways, it seems to me. But after answering this question and really thinking about it, I just can't shake this idea that I think October's going to look a little bit brighter than things look right now.
All right, Joe, you have to choose one or the other here. Like, you're talking about October, you're talking about those key pieces coming in, but I agree with Jeff that I feel like this team hasn't given us a ton of clarity, and even where we do have, like, okay, it makes sense why you're starting this guy in goal and why you're going with this center back pairing given the limitations, it still feels like we end up getting more questions and more obvious areas for improvement. Do those key pieces, do you think, elevate the team and sort of make them look like a more cohesive unit, or do those key pieces come in and then we have more stuff to figure out, more dysfunction? Is there a chance, or as likely of a chance, that they end up like creating as many questions as we already have?
I don't think so. I think the players that we're not seeing largely answer questions rather than create more, like Malik Tillman as being maybe that third option in midfield or being a narrow winger, I think elevates this team over what Diego Luna is bringing. Balogun or Pepe, I think, answer questions up top. Richards being back in this lineup, answer questions in the back. Jedi Robinson, the same. There are still questions, don't get me wrong. Goalkeeper is still a question. I don't think Matt Freese was great over the weekend. I think there are some concerns in that part of the field. That's not new information. The other center back spot, things we talked about before, those are all real issues for the U.S., but compared to what we've seen, I think those players kind of naturally answer questions. It is weird. I know I just said there was a bit of a positive. I think there's also a negative around this U.S. group, which is that even when you bring those players back in, like a big picture narrative, even when you bring those...
I was going to say, where is there a negative around the 2025
I know, you'd never be able to believe it.
I won't hear it.
The negative, the big picture one, is that you bring all these players back in, and what's your ceiling then as a group? Well, I think at that stage, your ceiling looks an awful lot like the ceiling in 2022 looked. Like, it seems to me that at this stage, Pochettino is scratching and clawing to be a like top 16 team sort of at the World Cup, where that's right where the U.S. felt their ceiling in 2022. The players other than Richards basically have not improved, and maybe Tillman. It's been a completely stagnant player pool since then. If anything, the group has kind of gone backwards. I think Pochettino's doing a lot of legwork to get the U.S. back to pretty much exactly where they were before. Now with an extra knockout round game, which increases the variance, which maybe works in their favor, maybe it doesn't. There are still concerns, Taylor. Don't get me wrong when those players come back in, but I think they're going to solve a lot of problems.
I've genuinely been deciding whether or not I want to say anything else about this because I feel like there's no way I can be brief, but I'm going to try to in the end.
Do it.
I think my answer to this question is it's a player selection availability issue over tactics, but I think it is this is not meant to be an insult, but I think it's largely because we don't have better players to select, which isn't breaking any new ground or anything, but I think it gets to what you all are talking about, that if you have several very important players not there, we just don't have anybody who can do what they do, even like an approximation thereof. And I think that speaks to the U.S. still just being a developing soccer nation, that we're trying to change the identity. We've been trying to change it since, I guess, Jurgen Klinsmann is the first one to come in and talk about changing the mentality, changing the way of playing. Berhalter says the same. Pochettino now is saying the same. But I think those things take a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of investment, a lot of changes to the way soccer works in this country, and more players going abroad and playing at a higher and higher level. And I just think right now it's a pool that doesn't really have that as much, or as much as we would like. And I think that's just kind of the reality. And so if you don't have 4 or 5 really important players, to your point, Joe, Malik Tillman probably is an upgrade on Diego Luna, not trying to be dismissive of Diego Luna, but then if he's having an off night or he's not able to go, it's question mark until like we see more of Gio Reyna at Borussia Mönchengladbach, and even then that's kind of like hopeful. It just feels to me like the pool isn't quite where we need it to be to play the style of soccer we want it to be. And so you can either revert back to like just go defensive and try hard and everybody bunker, or you can kind of keep plucking away and hope that it improves and believe that we are working towards something. I just think it's really hard to have a belief because it doesn't feel like there is logical growth. It feels like for every hole we plug, 2 new holes pop up. But maybe that's how growth works. On that note, hopefully that was brief enough. Let's go to one more question from Boomstick315. Get your boomstick out. You are the director of the U.S. Soccer Federation. Cool. Pochettino walks in after getting blown out by Japan and hands in his resignation letter. The first question I ask is, do we have to pay you? Or does you resigning mean that we get to keep the money and give it to somebody else? Boomstick would like to know, who are you hiring to coach, and what is your Hail Mary strategy to right the ship before the World Cup? Between the two of you, who thinks they have a more clear answer? Because I do not have an answer to this question.
I feel like
Give
I've got
me
a clear
one
answer.
Google query, and I'll let you know. So you
Okay,
go
so
I'm
first.
going to say Joe. I'm going to say Joe. Joe,
Okay,
go first.
I'll be quick. Welcome, BJ Callahan, Patches
I knew that was
O'Houlihan,
gonna be it.
back to the U.S. men's national team. And to be honest, I'm going to play Berhalter ball again, right? I mean,
Yep.
that is what BJ Callahan did. That's where he created his legend after years and years of hard work with Philadelphia and with the U.S. men's national team, of course.
Joe, can I tell
But
you one thing?
Please.
I wrote BJ Callahan and was like, I can't do it. I deleted it. But that was what I landed on. And then I was just like, it's too
If you're
too
looking
sad.
for an option, if we're talking about,
Yeah.
the U.S. is trying to get back to where they were at the end of the 2022 World Cup, which is kind of what they've been doing even before Pochettino came in, because the end of the Berhalter tenure kind of went south because Tim Weah punched a dude, and then they never really looked like they were progressing as a team anyway. But really, if you look at the goal as getting back to that level, BJ Callen basically kept the U.S. at that level against CONCACAF opposition at the Nations League, coached that team through that tournament, and then also led them most of the way through a Gold Cup after that. 4-3-3, defense first, a lot of mid-block, tight central pressure, some possession, but also not afraid to go and be direct and not too risky playing through pressure. That's basically what Berhalter's USMNT looked like. Berhalter talked a lot when he first got the job about being a team that disorganizes opponents with the ball and that builds through pressure, and then fast forward a little bit through his tenure, that wasn't the case anymore, right? He realized that this group of players was not really suited to do that kind of stuff. He built his team around the MMA midfield. He built his team around Weah and Pulisic being direct vertical wingers. Verticality was the buzzword. The U.S. became, quietly, because no one seemed to want to acknowledge it, a very pragmatic team along the way. And there was still some possession. There was control, though, most importantly, and that was the goal, was controlling games with that tight 4-3-3 structure. So, yes, they could use the ball, but they could squeeze the field higher up the field. Callahan just did all that stuff. Like, after being an assistant coach under Berhalter, he just carried that vision on. He didn't even bring it forward. He just did the same thing. And if you're trying to get back to something that breeds continuity for these players, that has some sort of comfort on the field after hopefully they've banded together through whatever's been going on behind the scenes for the last 2 years, I'm bringing Patches back, baby.
All right. I think I see the logic to it. I really do. Because for me, I think it needs to be someone who has a lot of familiarity with U.S. soccer and with the player pool. Like, if you bring in Jose Mourinho, which is itself a gamble, like, is he going to need that time to go through and look at all the players and figure it out and figure out who suits him? And I just don't think you have that time. You don't have that time. And so I don't think you can really roll the dice with somebody who doesn't have familiarity with the United States. I also don't think you want to gamble. And then I think you need somebody who has a clear idea of how they want to play. I'm not sure how much Patches O'Houlihan has, like, authority over some of the people that would be in that World Cup squad, but I think if you're doing kind of emergency firefighting, you go for what seems like it's going to work the best. And I struggle to think of a U.S. coach who is succeeding and has a very, like, strong identity for how they want to play and has familiarity with U.S. soccer that isn't basically Bruce Arena or Bob Bradley or Greg Berhalter. And so it feels like it's Patches, unless Wilfred Nancy wants to walk away from the crew, and I'm not sure that's going to really work in the short term for U.S. soccer.
Hard pass.
Yeah,
there we go.
Yeah, big time. I think I tend to agree. It would need to be someone who's more familiar with the player pool than the current group has been. So I think Callahan makes the most sense. If you wanted like a compelling alternative,
It's insane.
I would
We're
say
all like, "Hey, he makes the most sense." It's like-
yeah. I'm trying to come up with devil's advocate here, and I'll give you Hervé Renard because Saudi Arabia really struggled in the third round of AFC qualifying compared to expectations. They fell into the last chance saloon round of the qualifying where one team will qualify and one will make it to the Interconfederation playoff. And so if there was ever a time to just bring in like a veteran international management just to try to make like, I don't know, chicken salad out of whatever you're finding in the fridge, like this is probably the time to do that option. And you know, like the trade-off there, the idea is that Pochettino continues to run this like a club, right? And you even like when you think about what we talked about with the last question, where it's when you reintroduce the players, is that going to fix it? It's like yes and no, because he spent so much time with this group, or like an alternative group, we'll say, for whatever reasons, whether it was players taking themselves of availability in the summer or him trying to send messages in September. When you do that at a club, when you do that with a cup rotation game, they're still training together. The two sides, so to speak, they're still all ramping up to the same match day on the weekend and whatever. And so then it's a really seamless integration. But that is like 2 lost months. That is like a lost month of training time plus when you consider how long the Gold Cup window was. Like you just don't have that ability to make up that time. And I think that with someone who is more pragmatic and more used to, again, survive and advance mentality of international soccer, how do we get through this next tournament? Okay, this is how we need to play. It's not necessarily going to be the prettiest thing you've ever seen, but it fits the players that we have here. And I think that someone like Renard, or someone who is more of a, you could pick any number of these, right? Like, just someone who has done it before, coached at World Cups, had success in continental competitions like he has with AFCON, I think could help, but that's the hire I would have made a year ago. That's the hire I would have made instead of Pochettino. I think that's something I wrote on The Athletic, specifically about Renard, rather than this someone who's never worked internationally before, learning on the fly when you don't have these testing grounds. And now we've passed all of those testing moments that he could have had.
Just picturing Renard, like, walking into his first presser, sitting down, everyone's excited, he looks great in the white shirt, and then he just announces, Patrick Adjemang will be my starting striker at the World Cup, and then everybody just melts down from there. Joe, if you are going MLS, if you have to go with an MLS coach that isn't Patches O'Houlihan, BJ Callahan, would you rather, I've got a couple for you, Pat Noonan or Greg Vanney? For the U.S., obviously.
Wow. Pat Noonan. That's really hard, actually.
Pat Noonan or Ben Olsen?
Ben Olsen for the
content. I'm going Noonan over Olsen. I'm probably going Vanney over Noonan because I think that he can be a little more comfortable with a less control over the tactics of it all. So I think I'd go Vanney.
But then you're going Olsen over Vanney?
Nah, I am, but Jeff's going.
I don't think so. I think so far I'm Vanney. Yeah.
All right. What about Jim Curtin?
I'd probably go Curtin.
Jimmy C. I hope this is leading us to Brian Schmetzer because I'm going to pick Brian Schmetzer.
I am curious what you would both think of that. He was the only other name that really was first on my list, but I feel like basically I feel like there's a knock against him. I don't know if this is accurate, but I feel like there's a knock that he's not really like a great tactician. He's good at like managing his players, managing Major League Soccer, understanding what you have to do and when to get your team together, kind of not panicking and recognizing it's a long season. Like, is that an unfair summary of Brian Schmetzer? Because I do, he's won MLS Cup. He's been an excellent manager. It just seems like he gets kind of dismissed as like an elite MLS manager.
Yeah, Seattle consistently have best-in-class rosters, and so I think that naturally means that we don't think about Schmetzer's tactical choices quite as much. They don't get talked about quite as much, and they don't play remarkable soccer, right? I mean, they haven't really pushed many tactical envelopes or moved any trends forward around the league since I've been covering the sport anyway, and covering Major League Soccer. I think at times the Sounders' attack has lagged, and Schmetzer has been slow to move things around, but you also can't argue with the success. So I could imagine a world, and I was thinking about this, I could imagine a world where you bring in Schmetzer, or even like a Vermees type, or somebody that seems very practical and has been around the game for a long time. They just bring in all the best players in the pool again, and they're like, duh, obviously I'm going to do this. We're going to get the talented players. I'm going to lay down the law. Here's how this is going to be. Like, I'm brought in to help make sure you guys don't embarrass yourselves. And it's like a very kind of no-nonsense kind of messaging. And somehow that works after what's happened under Pochettino. But I suppose these are all pipe dreams.
All right.
No, I think that could work. And I think the one other thing I'll say on Schmetzer is he's obviously very good at knowing what button to push when. Like, you think about with the Leagues Cup final, whatever, all the questions are inevitably going to be you're playing against Lionel Messi. And what does he do? It's like, yeah, they have Lionel Messi, greatest player, but we have Paul Rothrock. And immediately it's like this whole team is like, yeah, we got Paul Rothrock. And like the rest of the week, the tone of those press conferences, the tone of everything coming out of Seattle, the fan base was so like, yeah, we have Paul Rothrock. Like, don't like buy into all these like distractions people are throwing at you. He would be a great coach for Super Bowl week is what I'm saying. Like that whole like kind of classic fight the mind game sort of thing. And I think that you need someone with that mentality at a World Cup. So I actually do think that Brian Schmetzer would be a viable future pick for the U.S. men's national team. Not just like in this sort of a scenario. I think I would give him a cycle and see at this point.
So Brian Schmetzer with BJ Callahan as his assistant, they both have to wear shirts that are tailored to Hervé Renard, so we get a sort of interesting look for both.
No, that's perfect.
I like it. All right, cool. Perfect. All right, lovely. All right, let's take one more break. On that note, we'll come back. We'll talk about some players with stuff to prove against Japan. Back soon. Welcome back, everybody. We are recording this Tuesday morning. We've got Japan still to play this evening, so by the time many of you hear this, that game will have happened, and you can look back on this happily or angrily or sadly, or maybe a combination thereof. But we're going to talk about the players with the most to prove against Japan for whatever reason. Jeff, why don't you get us started with a player or players? But let's go player first. Singular.
Yeah. Well, let's go whoever starts at striker, I think is where I'm going to fall right now. And I'm guessing that's pretty much between Balogun and Sargent. Correct me if I'm wrong. I still have this, like, pesky feeling that the U.S. would play best with Ricardo Pepi up top. And a lot of this is we haven't been able to see that for reasons completely unrelated to Berhalter changing over to Pochettino, which is, of course, his injury against Liverpool in the Champions League with PSV. He's in a new reign of confidence, I will say, Ricardo Pepi. I think that you've seen it with his, him inheriting the 9 shirt at PSV, I think is a good sign of trust, but I think that he also, a lot of how he plays can inform the movement of others, whereas I think Sargent and Balogun have to rely more on the movement of others to figure out their own. As Joe perfectly found, like, the idea that Josh Sargent is the ideal pressing forward has pretty wholly been debunked, thanks to the fine work of you and himself, frankly, with his pressing. And then his scoring record, you can't ignore it. I know a lot of people want to say that, like, he hasn't scored since 2019 and it's been however many games, but look how he can't score with this team. There's got to be a point where that matters, that a striker cannot score with the team that he's being asked to score goals for, right? And so, like, I think I want to see alternatives there. I haven't seen him play at a level where I'm confident that he can be a starting striker at a World Cup in quite some time. I would rather see Balogun get more of those looks right now, frankly, but ultimately, so I would say I want Balogun to show why he should be in that spot and kind of hone in the competition a little bit, because that's another one of those areas where we have a bounty of viable options in a lot of our minds, so we aren't talking about it as much as the goalkeepers, the center backs, whatever. But I think it's a huge thing right now that there's just, like, zero continuity in that position right now, and I don't think that helps one of those positions like goalkeeper where you need continuity to have that confidence to perform.
Joe, would you agree? You want to see a striker in there?
Yeah, I wrote Balogun's name specifically, okay, over Downs or Sargent. I'm good on Sargent for reasons that we've talked about now for plenty of time. Downs, I just don't think is ready, and may never be, but he may be, but not now. If Balogun's able to go 60 minutes, you start him in this game against Japan. I am optimistic enough to think that he would look quite good, because I still think he is the best striker in this pool. This is an area where Pochettino's been a bit hard done by injuries, because Pepi goes down and misses the summer with an injury and has been out for large stretches, not healthy enough to be in this camp. Balogun had never played under Pochettino because of injury challenges for an entire year. So it's a difficult situation for Poch. We talk about how many minutes Ajman got over the summer. I'm not exactly sure who those minutes are supposed to go to at the end of the day. So Balogun is, I think, the obvious striker with this current group, and would still be my go-to for a larger group. He's got to continue to show that. I would expect that he will, because I think he's that level of player. My top answer for this was any central midfielder has something to prove against Japan. Pochettino, more than any other position group, has just torched his midfield depth chart to the ground. Or not his. Yeah. What I perceived the U.S.'s midfield depth chart to be, he's just torched it. Like, no Weston McKennie in this camp, no Tanner Tessman, no Aiden Morris. You run through the list. No Johnny Cardoso, no Yunus Musa. Yep. You're deep on the depth chart for a lot of these guys. And I don't know that that's totally a bad thing. Like, I'm open to the idea of a Jack McGlynn or a Christian Roldan being a better soccer player than Tanner Tessman. In fact, I think there's a real possibility that that's true. Roldan is probably a player that you'd feel more comfortable, that I would feel more comfortable starting tomorrow in a very important game than Tessman. Yeah, and McGlynn, I think, has obvious plus skills that even Tessman doesn't have. So there are differences in these players, but who rises from the ashes, right? If we're talking about Poch just torching this all to the ground, he wants to build something out of it. He's not just torching to torch. That's not good for his future career prospects. Totally. What is he going to build out of it? And who is going to step up out of the rubble that we're seeing right now? The two names that I think are most relevant for the Japan game, and two of the most relevant names for the future as well, are McGlynn and Roldan. Very different players. I thought both players were good off the bench against South Korea, game state, et cetera, et cetera. Roldan, I would be very keen to see more of in this game as half of the double pivot. I think he has been that good in MLS. He's been better than Jack McGlynn has been in MLS. McGlynn, though, is the higher potential player, who is he's the sexier player, right, with how he actually interprets the game and the skills that he has. But the door is open. Pochettino could not be making this more clear, that the door is open. You've got to actually get up, step on your feet, and walk through that door. There's an opportunity here. I think in central midfield, that opportunity is shinier than it is just about anywhere else.
When Joe thinks sexy, he thinks Jack McGlynn. You heard it here first. I mean, the question I have a response, Joe, like, if you have three midfielders, which we would assume the U.S. will have, they kind of stick with what's been working or not working, we would assume Tyler Adams is going to start. We would assume Diego Luna is going to start. That kind of leaves one spot open, which we assume is Berhalter, De La Torre, maybe McGlynn, maybe Roldan. Like, it just feels like I agree with you, but at the same time, don't we kind of have an idea of who's going to start there, or do you think it is kind of all open in this game?
I mean, I am thinking specifically about that one spot. Like, one of the spots I imagine is going to Adams. One of the spots you said Luna, who started in that 10 spot against South Korea. I would probably move Luna Pulisic out of that, right? And I put Pulisic in there, at least with this group of players. So it's one spot, but one spot is big. Like, that's a huge opportunity. The fact that we are less than a year away from the World Cup, and an entire midfield spot seems to be up for grabs because Pochettino's not calling in the obvious player that it seems like would fill that spot in Weston McKennie. I think there is a absolutely massive, massive opportunity, more than any other place on the field, including center back, because that just seems even murkier than this. I think midfield, that number 8 spot in particular, at least for today, is there for the taking.
Speaking of center backs, would either of you have any particular center back on this list for players with the most to prove? Like, you could throw Nokai Banks in there if he plays at all, but given the lack of depth behind Chris Richards, and even like we're not sure if it's going to be Tim Ream or the depth behind Tim Ream, I feel like if he gets minutes and looks good, there's a shout for him to be back in the camp. It's a big if as to if he does get minutes, but maybe we see some experimentation there.
For Banks, and Jeff, I'm curious what you think about this. For Banks, I have him on my list, but I have him in a slightly different category, where if we're talking about players with the most to prove, I don't think Banks fits in there. But Banks fits in the not much to prove yet, but sure would be nice if he did category. That's where I've got Noah Kai Banks.
Yeah.
There is something there. Like there is a roster spot, and more than that, a starting spot. They're ready to be grasped. And nobody's expecting Banks to be able to go and grasp it and do that on his own just yet, Jeff. But, man, it would be nice if he did.
It'd be precedented, right? Not in this program's history, but like think of Antonio Silva with Portugal ahead of the 22 World Cup. He was rising through the ranks with Benfica. He was with some of the youth teams, but relatively untested. But then suddenly he was so good at the club level and so consistent when he would come in that Portugal like called him in before he was ready for a World Cup and gave him starts, right? And his career's kind of petered off because it was one of those, maybe they brushed him a little bit too soon in his career, and now maybe he's suffering for it a little bit. But for our purposes here, right? Like, yeah, I think it's the Julian Green case, right? Where it's if you're a young player in form coming into your own who has one obvious advantage, whatever it is. Maybe it is like your physical traits are just that much better than everyone else. Maybe it is your reading of a game, your aerial prowess, your ball playing out of the back, whatever it is. But if you have that one weird trick that opponents hate, I think it can get a little bit easier to make your case, even if it is as a specialist, when you think of like Shaq Moore getting called into the Copa America for long throws, right? Stuff like that. So I still think when you look at center backs, excuse me, it's such a thin group on this squad where I almost just want to see Ream and Richards put in like a good professional shift for 90 minutes against a high-level opponent to remind us that there is a partnership that can do that and that can shepherd that away. Have we seen that from the two of them? No, not necessarily, right? And I think that maybe at the Gold Cup we did, depending on the opponent. But if it can translate there, I think that when we were leaving the 22 World Cup cycle, none of us would have wanted to hear Tim Ream might still be one of the best options to start at center back, and that's no fault of his, but that's more so because of the rest of the options who haven't risen to that level as he nears his 40th birthday. But if that's where we're at, and if that is genuinely going to be best for the game state Pochettino is trying to foster, for the defensive rotations, whatever, where you have McKenzie coming off the bench in his place, or Zimmerman or Robinson or whoever else is going to get that spot, Carter Vickers and Trusty are going to fall off the map in a hurry because they're not playing Champions League soccer this year. So maybe you just need the two of them to put in the best shift that you've seen from two center backs this year, just to like give one less like high pressure question to this. Maybe it's as simple as that.
All right, gentlemen. Any other players with points to prove versus Japan?
Everyone, I guess. I mean, like, I love Joe's point about the midfield. Like, I've been thinking about that for 10 minutes here, and I couldn't agree more that group has just been so throttled. And you look at it, and it was the clear, obvious strength of 22 was MMA. And maybe there was a time you needed to just wholesale change to see alternatives, but I would have said that would have been 23 and not 25. and I'm worried there isn't time to rebuild those synapses. I would guess Tillman would slot in over Luna in that midfield slot for like a World Cup game, maybe. So then if that's the case and you're looking at Adams and Tillman as World Cup starters, you're right. There's only one spot available, and for both of the M's in this, plus the De La Torres, plus the players who have been, on the rise like Aiden Morris and Tanner Tessman. It's hard. It just makes it very difficult to project much about this team when you know so little about its heart.
Yeah, and I'll add the only other name on my list is Matt Freese, who's, in my mind, I know he had some good moments coming off his line against South Korea. His list of minuses, like negative moments, is growing. I talked about that second goal. We talked about that on Saturday. We think about the big positive for Freese being the penalty shootout in the Gold Cup, and that was a huge moment, and that is a legit skill that matters in a World Cup. But also he's directly responsible for giving the goal against Haiti away, and his hands aren't totally clean, is all I'm saying. And so Freese, I think, probably knows that the job is not his absolutely etched in stone just yet, but he's got an opportunity if he starts. If not him, then Celentano. If not him, then Jonathan Klinsmann. Somebody's going to have an opportunity in that spot, because if we're looking at another area of the field that's not quite done yet, goalkeeper is one of those spots.
And I would just welcome Tim Weah or Christian Pulisic, or Tim Weah and Christian Pulisic, to do things and score goals and create.
Tim Weah's going to be sitting on the bench
they're all very fun.
with that nice little hammy.
That's
he's got.
Right. So who then has the most to prove with that in mind, Joe? Is it Zendejas?
I mean, Zendejas, I would frame it as Zendejas would be the most likely to get minutes. I don't think Zendejas has anything to prove, really. I mean, maybe that just comes from a place of lack of expectation on my part of him, but it kind of feels like we know what we're going to get from Zendejas, like a guy who could be on the World Cup roster, and we'd all be fine with it and think he probably isn't going to play very much, and that's probably okay for the U.S.
Yeah, I guess Pulisic, from your original question, I would like to see a Christian Pulisic's very good for the U.S. men's national team performance. That would be nice. It's been a little longer than usual between those performances where you look and it's like, that's the guy. There's no wonder that he is counted on to win games for this team. Like that, I know that you talked about it, but he took 4 shots. All of them were inaccurate. 3 of them went off frame. 1 of them was blocked. Just get that performance, that confidence, especially if he's going to play on the right again, which a lot of us had thought maybe would be even better for him at an international level. If he can have one of those a goal and an assist sort of days, I think that'll help bring the temperature down around a lot of other areas, because the best player is doing best player things.
All right, well, there we have it. USMNT discussed. We look forward to seeing how it goes against Japan. I'm a little bit nervous, but also it's always nice to see the U.S. and hopefully get more data, an even larger sample size, and obviously a win in the end. We're totally going to see that happening. Mauricio Joe, Pochettino Joe, a double Joe in there. Nicely done, my friend. J. Lowry, an excellent performance by you.
I got roasted for being someone who just unbuttons the top button and loosens the tie when it's time to get loose, and Taylor's out here talking about how we love to acquire data and slightly larger sample sizes. Who's the real nerd? Let the listeners decide.
You. Jeff Reuter, thank you as well, my friend, for all of your knowledge and insight and enthusiasm today.
Fun to change topics, even if it was as dour as this. Thanks, guys.
Listeners, thank you all so much for listening. Hope you enjoy the U.S. game tonight. We'll be back tomorrow to discuss it. Until then, talk to you soon.